Welcome back to part 2 of the instructions for building the TBM switch panel by M9 Aviation. In part 1 we talked about building the case, we talked about assembling the faceplate itself with all of the switches, and we talked a little bit about grounding wiring on that switch panel. In part 2 we're going to be talking more about the details of getting all of the wiring done on the panel. So in your kit you would have received a box like this. You'll have had to open it up and kind of route the wires out the holes like this. Don't worry about the coloring on the box, it's just the way they do it. But you should have 5 different colored wires. You should have a blue, a black, a red, a yellow, and a green. The green wire we're not going to use a lot of today because I like to reserve that for grounding, so I'll just kind of get that out of the way. The other thing that then what you will want to do is you'll want to refer to the wiring or the pinout diagram that I provided with the kit, and you'll see that we have a 4-color repeating scheme. We've got red, black, blue, and yellow. The reason I do this is it's a lot easier to try to keep track of the wires as you're wiring up the 50 or so switches that you're connecting if you adhere to some sort of a pattern. So what this does is it outlines what color wire, it outlines what pin it's going to be on, and then it gives you some idea of what the switch position is. And we'll get into that when we start soldering this to the switch panel itself. So there's really 2 steps that we're going to cover in this today. First is going to be just getting all the wires cut, and then we'll be connecting everything up to the Arduino shield. When we're done with the Arduino shield and getting it wired, we'll end up with something that kind of looks like this rat's nest. We'll have all of the wires connected to that and labeled, and then what we can do is we can start to do a little bit of grooming on the wires and get it ready for attaching to the switch panel itself. So what I like to do, we need about 48 wires here, and since we're going to be using 4 at a time, we can do 12 poles, and typically 12 inches is enough length on these wires. That's probably a little bit more than you'll need, but it's better to have a little bit more than not enough. Okay, so what I like to do, we'll get the green wire out of the way. I just grab the 4 wires here, bundle them together a little bit, and we'll pull them out till roughly 12 inches or so, and just lop them off. And we'll do that 12 times so that we have a total of about 48 wires. We've got 12 bundles of 4 wires each, and so now I'm going to just organize those into colors. A little bit easier for the next step. So now we've got our collection of 4 colors. The next step is to label them. And again, if you try to do this in a very structured approach, you'll be much less frustrated when it comes time to actually do the soldering and the assembly. So what I do is I just take a little bit of painter's tape here. I just rip off little strips here, and I'm just gonna make labels that basically go from number 2, because that's the first pin that we're going to be using, number 2, and I'll just go all the way through to number 48. The thing to remember is that we do skip some of the ones that are in gray. We don't use those because those are reserved for future LEDs. So it's basically 2 through 29, and then it starts to skip a few, and then around 40 or 38 it restarts. So I'm going to go ahead and label that, and then I'll be back with you and show you how that looks. Okay, when you're done, you should have a bundle of each color, black, yellow, red, and blue, that are all labeled from 2 through 30 or 48, and then an A0 and an A1. Now, just a couple of words of warning. Again, remember to skip the ones that are in gray. You don't need those. And it is a good idea to check as you're going along. It is nice to get in a pattern, but just double check occasionally to make sure that you're actually putting the right label on the right colored wire. You'll also want to do a couple extra red wires that we'll use for the power, and we'll do 1 green wire that we'll use to ground the board to the switch panel itself. So we'll lop that off. You don't need to label those because those are pretty obvious. The red one's without label or power, and the green one is a ground. All right, then the next step in the prep process is the old snippers. So what I like to do is just go ahead and get all of the unlabeled ends, get them all cut off or get them stripped off so that they're ready to go into the Arduino board. And you only need to strip off about a 1/4 inch. The stripper will do anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a little bit more. Once they're soldered on the board, you can always cut off any excess if necessary. Okay, once you're done with that step, you'll have your bundle of labeled wires that all have one end cut off, and we'll be ready to solder onto the shield. All right, now it's time to start the soldering. So if you take a look at the Arduino shield, you'll have soldered the pins on the one side that does not have labeling on it. And now we're going to be looking at the other side. And you'll notice if you look that the shield has numbers along all of these rows. And so the numbers on here, they go from 0 through 13, and they go through 14 and around the back side all the way down to 52. And then on this side we have some power and grounds, and then we have the analog inputs, which are A0 through A16. So the numbers that are on our sheet here, they correspond to the digital side of things. So the 2 through 13 and then 14 through 52. There's a couple that we'll use on this side with the analog, and I'll talk about those when we get there. So the process that I typically take is I've got one of these little soldering helpers. I'm not quite convinced yet if it helps or hinders, because mine's just not big enough to hold things down quite properly, but that's what I've got. So what I do is I just kind of clip the board in here to kind of keep it somewhat steady. Now this takes a little bit of dexterity to get the wires in the right place. But in essence, all we're going to do, I've got my solder here now that we'll end up using. I got my soldering iron over here heating up. So we're just going to follow the wiring diagram from this point, right? So we're looking for pin number 2 on the shield. It's going to be a red wire. So we'll go ahead and we'll find the red wire number 2 in our fine collection of wires. Number 2, and of course it's already stripped. And then we're just going to feed that into the number 2 pin on the back side. So once you get one in here, then you don't necessarily have to flip it over every time. You can just kind of remember or go by memory. I like to keep my soldering iron about 400 degrees because it melts things fairly quickly. You don't have to spend a lot of time dwelling. But you do have to remember that if you spend too much time here, you're going to end up melting the wire and or the pin. So it's really just a second or two to get stuff hot enough. Just going to put a little bit of solder, let it suck down into the hole, and you've got it soldered. Make sure to keep your tip nice and clean, because it helps with getting a nice hot connection. So the next wire is a black number 3, so we'll look for our black number 3. There it is. Again, we stripped that earlier. I'm just going to double check myself. So for this run, we're going to go this way on the board. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that one in the next hole. And once you've done it a few times, you can kind of figure out how to get it in the hole without having to turn things over, or you can turn them over. It just goes a little bit faster if you're not constantly turning the board over. So the black number 3, just a couple of seconds there. Suck down in there, and we've got number 3. And we'll just do that for the rest of these. I will I'll go about my business and get them done. I'll speed up the video, but in essence, you're just going to do that for every one of the pins on my sheet. You're going to wire the corresponding into the corresponding hole on our shield. All right, at this point, we're transitioning from the single line on the one side of the shield to the double pins. So you'll notice it's going to be really hard to show in the video, but on the labeling, they're actually labeled with a little arrow. But the side that's in toward the center of the shield is the even numbers, and the ones on the outside, this direction, of the shield are the odd numbers. So 26 is the first one that we do, so that's actually this top inner one. And we start inserting our cables. We'll do that one this way. And it does tend to get a little close quartered in there with those double pins, but it's pretty manageable. So now we'll just go to the outside pin on that row. All right, now I'll point out a couple of things here. One is, I've stressed following the chart, making sure that the pins and the colors match up, so that when you put these or attach these to the faceplate, that everything goes well. It's not hugely critical if you accidentally get a wire off either color scheme or off on the pins, because everything that happens within the panel itself is controlled by a configuration file. So don't worry too much. As long as all of the switches are wired to a pin, it can always be figured out if you did something a little bit wrong, got some wires mixed up, etc. So don't be too concerned about that. We've reached pin number 29, so now we're actually skipping a couple. So we're going to skip pins 30 and 31, and the next pin is 32. So you just have to make sure that you're aware of that. So I'm going to find my 32 wire, hopefully, 32. And then just remember, you have to find the 32 hole on the back side of your board. So you're going to be skipping a few holes. And we're going to go, we went 29 and 30, and 30, 31, so 32 is going to be right here. So it's actually from where your last even was, you're skipping one, because you went from 28, you skipped 30, and now you're going to 32. So in there, and then 33 is a black one. 32 will be right next to it on the outer side of that row. I got that one short. And then after 33, we skip another one. We're skipping 34, and we're going to 35, which is a blue. So we did 33, we skipped 34, and we're going to go to 35. I'm kind of doing this by memory, but let me switch it over. 34, 35. So we did 32, 33, and 34, and then we skipped to 35. Oops. And then we skip 36 and 37, and we're going to go to 38, which is a yellow. 38, which is going to be on the inside. So we did 35, 36, 37, 38. We'll just make sure here on the inside, 38. And then we're back on track. We don't need to skip anymore. So. Okay, so now we're done with the single row of the digital side and the double row. And we'll come back and there's just a few wires that we'll put on this side. They have the two analog wires, the ground and the power. Okay, so for the last few wires that we have a red one, or I'm sorry, we have a blue one and a yellow one that are labeled A0 and A1. So for those, we're going to put those on the analog side of the board. I'm going to go ahead and flip this around. Careful not to get stuff melted in the soldering iron. And again, on the back side of the board, you won't be able to see it real well on the video, but they are labeled starting about midpoint on the board. They're labeled A0, A1, and so on and so forth, going that direction. So we're going to want to put the, I think it's the blue one, we're going to start that in A0. Go ahead and get that in there. And then we'll do A1, which is right next to it, toward the double row of pins. And then the last two that we'll want to do are the ground lead and the power lead. So on the back side of the board, you're going to see there's two actually ground GND pins, so we can use either one of those. And then the power pin that we want is one that's labeled +5V for +5 voltage. So I'll just grab one ground and one +5 voltage. Have the shield all wired up. There are a note on the sheet. There are two green leads. You no longer need to use both of the green leads. When I first started doing this, I was doing one ground for the switches and one ground for the LEDs. You really can get away with just using a single ground wire, so you only need one of those. So you've got everything wired up now. Just in terms of cleanup, you can grab a pair of clippers and you can just snip off all of the excess wire that's on the solder side of this board, just so you don't have these wires sticking up and getting bent, causing a short. So we'll just snip all these off. You can snip them off right above the little solder joint. You don't want to snip them too low, or you'll actually then you may snip the solder itself off. Just want it enough so they're not sticking up and getting bent, causing a short. there. Make sure you don't leave any extra ones lying around on the top. When you're soldering, the flux tends to make things a little bit sticky, so just want to make sure that you, one, cut them all, and two, got a little extra remnants off, because it only takes a little bit of a short there to cause things to not work properly. Alright, so now we've got our shield ready to go. We've got all of our wires, labeled wires on our shield, and then the next step will be to dress these up and get them ready for attaching to the switch panel board. The next portion of the build is going to be to dress up the Arduino shield that we just constructed. So rather than having this tangled mess of cords, we're going to actually run things out into a little bit nicer, groomed manner. I drew here on the desk here, so if you look at the front of the panel, this is the front, and as it's mounted in the box, the USB cable is going to be on this side. That's where the plug is on the back side of the box. So when we mount the Arduino, we want to make sure that the USB plug is pointed in this direction. Right, so just for reference sake, I'm going to put that there. And so if we look at our shield, in order to get our shield to match up with the Arduino, it's going to sit like this. So we just want to make a mental note, and I'll just draw here on the desk, that the shield should sit here like this. Right. Just so we remember where things are going. The other thing we want to keep in mind is the switch numbers themselves. So if we look at the front of the panel again, I'll turn this way so it makes more sense. The way I've set it up is that I start my numbering on the top portion, so we go from number 2 down across, and then we start down here with the icing panel and we continue on. So this switch here contains pin 2 and 3, depending which position it's in, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and so on and so forth. So when we look at the back side of this, what we want to do is we want to make sure to route our cables so that when this shield is sitting on here, the wires that are coming out for those pins come out on the side that we want them to come out on for soldering. So what I've done here, started doing some cleanup here. So for the first switches that we want are, again, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And if we refer to the wiring diagram, that's the switches are outlined here. 2 is the landing gear or landing lights, all the way down to 11, which is the standby generator reset. So we want those to come out this side over here. So what I did is I grabbed the wires 2 through 11, and I've kind of routed them, kind of bent them around and routed them out this side of the board. Now you want to be a little bit careful when you're bending the wires to not, you can bend them once, it's usually not a problem, but if you start bending them, it'll only take a couple bends back and forth before you break that wire off, and then you'll end up resoldering again. So, you know, be gentle, just kind of work these wires. I like to kind of give them a little bit of a bend in here, and then we'll use a zip tie to tie them together. But we've got 2 through 11 that are coming out this direction. That handles, again, these switches here. And that gets us up to this point. We also want to grab the 5 volt and the analog 0 wires that go for this potentiometer. And again, if we look at page 2, analog 0 is a blue one for the panel dimmer, and then we want the red one for the power. So I've done that. I've grabbed the +5 voltage and I've routed it that way, and I've grabbed the A0. So those will all come out this direction. And then the other thing that we're going to want, I'll just set that here for now. The other thing we're going to want is we'll do all of the icing panels and probably the master reset and caution switches. So we'll grab those. If we look at our list again, it looks like those start at about 29. It goes from 29, the icing panel starts at 29 and goes to the inertial separator, which is 40, so we want 29 through 40. And those are going to be on the double pin side of the board. So 29, I got to turn it this way so I can find it. 28, so here's 29. And 29 is a yellow, so you can double check it by color. It takes a little bit of dexterity here to get stuff moving in the right direction. So I'm going to add 29, just kind of bend it here and add it to the bundle that's coming out this way. And then we want all the way to, what did I say again? 29 through 40. So that would be these. It's 29. These as well. They're going to come this way, and then 40 is this 38, 39. 40, and 40 is a, looking at our sheet, 40 is a black color. So we'll grab these and pull these out. I suppose one of the things I could do here is, in part of the build guide, I guess I could just list out all of the different ones that are going to come across here. But okay, so we've got that coming out, and then we want to have the master caution and warning switch and lights. So we want, that's 41, 42, 43, and 44. So we'll add those to the bundle as well, all the way up through 44. 44 is a black one, so we'll do to here. And add that into the little bundle. Okay. Just kind of clean that up there. The wiring bundle comes with some zip ties, the wiring box. So I'm just going to use one of those zip ties to kind of hold stuff together here for now, somewhat loosely, until we make sure we have everything we want. Okay, so you can start to see what's happening here is we've got this little bundle now that's coming out this direction. Now, theoretically, everything else should go this direction. So we'll double check that. So what we want to do is we want to start with the power source. So we want basically 12 all the way through the ELT. So we want 12, which is our power or sort switch, all the way down to the ELT, which is 28. So we want 12 through 28. So 12 and 13 are already on this side, so I'm going to just kind of bend those again. Try not to bend too much at the solder joint, bend it more off the solder joint. We'll get a little bit of a bundle going that way. 12 and 13, and then we want to go all the way down to 28. So that means 14 through this, which is 27, and 28. So that means this little bundle here, this is going to go the opposite way, so I'm just going to try to untangle it here. And again, we'll do the same thing we did. We'll just kind of try to make a nice bend on the wire, kind of push those down so that we got something coming out here. And that takes us down through this, and then we have the ECS switches. ECS switches are 45, 46, 47, and 48, and that would be these guys here. So we'll add these to the bundle. Okay, just being somewhat careful not to bend them around too much. Just going to route them over into this bundle here. And then we need the brake. The brake potentiometer, which we know is A1. And again, let's look at our sheet. We've got A1, which is parking brake. It's a yellow one. So we'll kind of grab this one and add it to this bundle going this direction. So now we have two bundles, and we have the ground wire that's kind of set here. That'll just sit down, and that's going to ultimately connect to one of these big switches. So I'll just grab my zip ties here and zip tie this one up as well. And tighten it down. This one I can tighten down as well. And then maybe we'll put one in the middle just for good measure. Kind of keep stuff bundled together. Okay, so you see that's going to be a little bit easier to work with. This guy, I probably should have added him, so let me cut this off. I have a couple extra zip ties. Add him to the bundle just so that he doesn't have any strain on, so there's no strain on that. Or it might accidentally break off from moving the cables around. That's the other reason to do this, is because now you've created more of a structure for things to hold on to, so you're not, when you're moving the cable around, now you're not stressing out the solder joints. Okay, so we've got this nice bundle, and again, it's going to sit above the panel, something like that. And just to double check our work, because it's always good to do, the Arduino will sit on top, and it's pointed in the direction that we expect it to point, which is to the right of the panel. So we've got that set. The next step is going to be soldering these to the board.